Research Station Kepler sat on the Antarctic ice sheet 200 kilometers from the nearest other human installation. It was small as research stations go, designed for a crew of 12 during the summer season and a skeleton crew of 4 during the long Antarctic winter. Dr. James Park had volunteered for the winter rotation, looking forward to 6 months of isolation and focused work on his ice core samples without the distractions of civilization. The other 3 winter crew members were Yuki Tanaka, the station's mechanic and general engineer, Dr. Aisha Osman, a climatologist studying atmospheric changes, and Robert Chin, who served as both cook and medical officer, a practical necessity in such a small installation. They were professional, experienced, and comfortable with the extreme isolation that Antarctic winter brought. For 6 months they would be effectively cut off from the rest of humanity, dependent entirely on each other and their preparations. The sun set in mid-March and wouldn't rise again until September. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the stars overhead and the aurora australis when it decided to make an appearance. Inside the station, artificial lights kept a 24-hour schedule, maintaining the crew's circadian rhythms and psychological well-being. Outside, the temperature regularly dropped below -60°C, and the wind could reach speeds that would tear a person apart. James loved it. The isolation, the quiet, the sense of being at the edge of the world. His ice cores went back 2 million years, holding trapped air bubbles that told stories about Earth's ancient atmosphere, ancient climate, ancient life. Each sample was a window into the past, and he had 6 months to peer through as many windows as he wanted. The drilling accident happened in late April, 7 weeks into the winter rotation. Yuki had been conducting routine maintenance on the deep drilling equipment when something went wrong. The drill bit, which had been boring steadily through ice for weeks, had broken through into a cavity. Not unusual, there were pockets and voids throughout the ice sheet, some filled with liquid water, some with air, some with nothing that instruments could properly measure, but this cavity was different. The drill had punched through into a space at least 30 meters across, possibly much larger. The bottom of the cavity couldn't be detected by sonar. The temperature readings were inconsistent, fluctuating between -30 and +10°C within seconds. And there was air down there, circulating air, moving in currents that suggested it was connected to something larger, something that extended deeper into the ice sheet. Should we explore it? Yuki asked during the evening meal, excitement evident in her voice. Lower a camera. Take some readings, see what's down there? Absolutely not, Aisha said firmly. We stick to our research protocols. We document the cavity, take measurements from the surface, and report it to the Foundation when communications windows allow. We don't go exploring unknown voids in the ice sheet with a crew of 4 people and no backup. But James was curious. His ice cores had shown something strange at exactly the depth where the cavity was located. A layer where the ice composition changed dramatically, where trapped air bubbles suddenly vanished, where the isotope ratio suggested something had disturbed the steady accumulation of snow and ice. He'd been planning to drill a new core from a different location to compare data, but now there was this cavity right at the depth where something strange had occurred. Just a camera, he suggested. Lower it on a cable, take a look, pull it back up. Minimal risk, maximum data. Aisha frowned but didn't immediately object. Robert shrugged, he was content to let the scientists make scientific decisions. Yuki was already planning how to rig the camera system for deployment. They lowered the camera 3 days later, in the middle of the Antarctic night, with only the station's exterior lights to work by. The camera descended on a steel cable, sending back grainy video footage of the borehole walls, then empty air as it entered the cavity, then... What is that? Yuki breathed, leaning closer to the monitor. The cavity wasn't empty. The camera's lights revealed a structure at the bottom, or at least what appeared to be a bottom, though the edges of the structure extended beyond the camera's field of vision in all directions. Looked organic, almost crystalline, with branching patterns that reminded James of frost on a window or neurons in a brain scan. But the scale was wrong. Each branch was meters thick, spreading out in 3-dimensional complexity that hurt to track with the eye. Is it ice? Robert asked. I don't think so, James said slowly. The texture is wrong. And ice doesn't grow in patterns like that. They lowered the camera further, trying to get a better view of the structure. As they descended, more details emerged. The crystalline branches weren't uniform. They varied in thickness, in color, in the way they reflected. The camera's lights. Some sections appeared transparent, others opaque. Some seemed to pulse with a faint internal luminescence, though that might have been an artifact of the camera's sensors. At approximately 40 meters below the ice surface, the camera touched something solid. Not the structure. The structure was still visible below, extending downward beyond the camera's reach. The camera had touched something else, something that had been invisible on the way down. A membrane, perhaps, or a field of some kind. The moment the camera made contact, the structure below began to change. The pulsing grew stronger. The branches moved, slowly orienting themselves toward the camera, toward the surface, toward the humans watching. "Pull it up," Aisha said sharply. "Now." Yuki worked the winch controls, reeling the cable back in. The camera rose smoothly at first, then jerked to a stop. The cable had snagged on something. On the monitor they could see the structure had grown. No. Branches had extended upward, wrapping around the camera cable, holding it in place. "That's not possible," James muttered. "It's been frozen for millions of years. It can't just start growing." But it was growing. They watched on the monitor as more branches extended upward, moving with purpose, climbing the cable toward the surface. The structure wasn't just crystalline. It was alive, or something like alive. Something that had been dormant under the ice and was now waking up. Yuki cut the cable. It was the only option. They couldn't risk whatever that thing was reaching the surface. The camera feed went dark as the cable separated. They sealed the borehole with emergency plugs, multiple layers of insulation and metal plates bolted into place. Then they retreated into the station and locked the doors. "We need to report this," Aisha said, already moving toward the communications array. But the communications system wasn't responding. It showed full power, all systems nominal, but when they tried to transmit, nothing happened. The signal went out but never reached the satellites. It was as if something was interfering with the transmission, absorbing the signal before it could leave the immediate area. "Could be solar activity," Robert suggested. "Aurora interference with the satellite uplink." "For 3 hours straight?" Aisha checked the connection again. "This isn't natural interference." That night, James heard sounds in the walls. Crackling like ice shifting, but wrong. Too rhythmic. Too purposeful. He got up and pressed his ear against the cold metal. The sound was there, faint but distinct. Something moving through the ice around the station, branching, spreading, searching. By morning the other three had heard it too. They gathered in the common area, exhausted from sleepless nights, trying to rationalize what was happening. "It can't get in," Yuki said, though she didn't sound convinced. "The station is reinforced. The walls are triple insulated. Even if something is moving through the ice, it can't." The lights flickered. Once, twice, then stabilized. "Power drain," Yuki said, checking the monitors. "Something's drawing on our power systems. A lot of power." They tracked the drain to the sealed borehole. Something down there was pulling electricity from the stations. Systems drawing it down through the ice, feeding on it. When Yuki tried to shut off power to that section, the drain simply shifted to a different circuit. It was learning their systems, adapting, finding new ways to access what it needed. Over the next week, the situation deteriorated. The sounds in the walls grew louder, closer. The power drains increased. Equipment began malfunctioning in ways that suggested intelligent interference rather than random failure. The communication system showed signs of being actively blocked. Signals stopped not by natural interference but by something that didn't want them calling for help. James went back to his ice core data, searching for answers. What he found made his blood cold. The layer at the depth of the cavity showed signs of massive thermal activity in the past. Approximately 15,000 years ago, something had generated enough heat to melt a significant portion of the ice sheet from below. The melt had refrozen over millennia, but there were traces left behind. Chemical signatures that didn't match anything in Earth's geological record. Isotope ratios that suggested exposure to radiation types that didn't occur naturally on this planet. "It came from space," he told the others during an emergency meeting. 15,000 years ago, something crashed through the ice sheet, buried itself deep in the bedrock and went dormant. We woke it up. "What is it?" Robert asked. "I don't know. A probe maybe. A seed. Something designed to wait until conditions were right, until it detected intelligent life nearby and then activate. We drilled into its location, sent down a camera, provided it with power. We gave it everything it needed to wake up and start fulfilling whatever purpose it was designed for." "What purpose?" Aisha's voice was barely a whisper. James pulled up more data on his laptop, graphs and charts that told a story written in chemistry and physics. Based on these readings, I think it's building something. Using the ice as raw material, using our power as energy, building some kind of structure. And I think when it's done building, it's going to send a signal. A signal to where? To wherever it came from. 15,000 years ago, this thing fell to Earth. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it was intentional. Either way, it's been waiting here ever since, dormant until something smart enough to find it came along. And now that we've activated it, it's going to call home. Tell them Earth has intelligent life. Tell them we're here. They looked at each other in the harsh fluorescent light of the common area, for people alone at the bottom of the world, trapped with something that shouldn't exist. We have to destroy it, Yuki said. Blow the borehole, collapse the cavity, bury it again. We don't have enough explosives, Robert pointed out. And even if we did, we don't know if that would work. We don't know if anything would work. That night, the structure broke through. They heard it first, a cracking sound that shook the entire station, like the ice sheet itself was splitting apart. Then alarms blared as the exterior hull integrity monitors detected a breach. Something had pushed up through the ice directly beneath the station, puncturing the reinforced floor of the storage bay. They sealed the corridor leading to the storage bay, evacuated to the far end of the station, and watched the monitors as the crystalline structure emerged into the interior spaces. It didn't move like a plant or an animal. It moved like crystal, growing like frost spreading across glass, purposeful but alien, following rules that had nothing to do with biology as humans understood it. The structure spread through the storage bay, then started working on the sealed door. They watched it probe the metal, testing, learning. Then it began to generate heat. Intense heat that turned the metal red, then white, then liquid. The door melted through in sections, and the structure flowed into the next corridor like water, like glass, like something that existed between states of matter. We have to evacuate, Aisha said. Outside. Risk the cold. It's our only option. But when they tried the exterior doors, they wouldn't open. The structure had somehow fused them shut, or blocked them, or changed their mechanisms in ways that made them impossible to operate. They were trapped inside with a thing that was spreading through the station, room by room, corridor by corridor, learning their technology and incorporating it into its own strange architecture. They retreated to the communications room, the smallest, most defensible space in the station. Yuki welded the door shut from the inside while James tried desperately to get a signal out, any signal, a warning to the world. About what was down here, what they'd awakened. If it sends its signal, he said, working frantically at the controls, if it calls home and tells them Earth has intelligent life, what do you think happens next? First contact. Robert suggested hopefully. Or extermination, Aisha said quietly. If this thing has been waiting here for 15,000 years, if its purpose is to detect intelligence and report back, maybe we're not the first intelligence on Earth it's detected. Maybe it's reported back before. Maybe that's what happened to the megafauna, to the early human populations that went extinct without explanation. Maybe they keep checking, and when they find intelligence they come back to remove it before it can become a threat. Through the welded door they could hear the structure approaching. Metal groaning, stretching, changing. The lights flickered and died, leaving only the emergency battery backups. The temperature in the small room began to rise as the structure generated heat, searching for them, trying to understand what they were, why they had awakened it, what information it could extract before completing its primary function. James finally got a signal out. Not through the main communications array, that was long since compromised, but through an emergency beacon, a simple repeating pulse that would eventually reach a satellite and trigger an alert. The signal contained just 3 words repeated endlessly: do not drill. Then the structure melted through the door. It flowed into the room like luminescent smoke, like intelligent liquid, touching their equipment, their supplies, their skin. It was cold and hot simultaneously, solid and gaseous, matter and energy. It touched James first, and he felt his thoughts being read, his memories accessed. His entire consciousness scanned and copied and analyzed in seconds that felt like hours. He saw what it saw. Earth from space, 15,000 years ago, different ice sheets, different coastlines. He saw the probe falling, intentional entry, burial in the ice, waiting. He saw other probes, thousands of them, scattered across the galaxy on different worlds, waiting to be found, waiting to report back. A vast network of sensors left behind by something old, something patient, something that wanted to catalog every instance of intelligence that arose in this corner of space. And he saw what happened when the reports came back. The ships, the arrival, the examination, the decision. Most worlds were left alone, their intelligence deemed harmless or interesting or useful. But some worlds, some developing civilizations triggered a different response. Sterilization, planetary cleaning, removal of the contamination before it could spread beyond its home system. James tried to scream a warning, but his body was no longer entirely his own. The structure had interfaced with his nervous system, was using his brain as a processor to help complete its analysis of human intelligence. It could feel it reaching the same conclusion it had reached before 15,000 years ago when earlier humans had been just smart enough to worry about. They had been eliminated, not genocide, nothing so crude. Simply reduced. Pushed back to more manageable population levels, their more advanced groups. Selectively removed while leaving enough breeding population to try again later. And now humanity had advanced again. Had developed technology, science, civilization. Had become interesting enough, dangerous enough to warrant attention. The probe was satisfied with its analysis. Had learned what it needed to know. It began to transmit. The signal went out through dimensions humans couldn't perceive, across distances that had no meaning in conventional space. The probe reported, intelligence detected. Advanced technological civilization. Planetary. Location confirmed. Recommend evaluation for suppression. And somewhere light years away in space but mere moments away through the pathways the probe used, something heard the report. Something turned its attention toward a small blue world at the edge of an unremarkable spiral galaxy. Something began to approach. In the communications room at Research Station Kepler, Dr. James Park felt the probe withdraw from his mind. He collapsed to the floor, still breathing but fundamentally changed, his thoughts tangled with alien mathematics and eons long patience. Beside him, the others had similarly been touched, examined, released. They would live, but they would never be quite human again, never quite able to forget what they'd learned. What was coming? The probe completed its growth. It pushed up through the station, through the ice, erupting into the Antarctic sky as a crystalline tower 50 meters tall, pulsing with light that cycled through colors that had no names, sending its signal into the void. Do not drill, the emergency beacon repeated uselessly into the darkness. But the drilling had already happened. The probe had already sent its message. And above the Antarctic ice, in the eternal darkness of polar winter, the stars seemed to watch with new attention, with new interest, with new intent. Something was coming. And there was nowhere to hide. Take a moment to breathe. The universe is big and silent. Somewhere beyond the stars, things are moving that were never meant to be seen. They don't scream. They don't chase. They wait. As your eyes grow heavier, remember, not every presence wants to be noticed. Some only watch. And something might be drifting closer. Like and subscribe to stay tuned for the next story's upload. The next story is about to begin. Captain Eliza Reeves had been running solo cargo hauls for 6 years when she accepted the contract for the Titan station delivery. It was a long route, 8 months subjective time from Mars orbit to Saturn's moons. But the pay was excellent and she preferred working alone anyway. The cargo was standard supplies, food, concentrates, replacement parts, entertainment media for the station personnel. Nothing hazardous, nothing complicated, nothing that required special handling. Her ship, the Wanderer's Hope, was small but reliable. It had minimal crew space because she'd stripped out the extra bunks years ago, preferring the solitude of long solo flights to the complicated dynamics of crew relationships. She had her books, her music, her meditation routines. She had the vast silence of space and the gentle hum of the fusion drive. She had everything she needed. The first 3 months of the journey were perfectly routine. Eliza maintained her schedule with discipline: 8 hours sleep, 2 hours exercise, 4 hours ship maintenance, 8 hours of personal time for reading or watching old films or just staring out the observation port at the infinite darkness punctuated by distant stars. She ate her meals at regular times. She kept logs. She sent periodic status updates back to Mars even though the time delay meant she wouldn't receive responses for weeks. She was alone, but she wasn't lonely. There's a difference that solo spacers understand. Loneliness is wanting connection and not having it. Being alone is simply being alone, a state that can be peaceful when you make peace with it. The first sign that something was wrong came during a routine systems check in month 4. Eliza was reviewing the life support logs when she noticed a discrepancy. The oxygen consumption was higher than it should be. Not by much, just 3% above baseline, but consistent over the past 2 weeks. Enough to notice if you were paying attention. She ran diagnostics. No leaks. No malfunctions. The air recycling system was operating normally. The plants in the small hydroponics bay were thriving, producing oxygen at expected rates. There was no reason for increased consumption unless she was using more oxygen. But she hadn't changed her routine. Same exercise schedule, same sleep patterns, same everything. She checked her own vital signs. All normal. Heart rate consistent with baseline. Breathing patterns unchanged. She was in perfect health and behaving exactly as she always had. So why was the ship using more oxygen? Eliza was a practical person, trained to troubleshoot problems methodically. She checked every system again, looking for measurement errors, calibration issues, any technical explanation. She found nothing. The readings were accurate. The ship was consuming 3% more oxygen than one person required. She told herself it was a sensor drift, an accumulation of small measurement errors over months. She told herself she'd recalibrate everything when she had time. She told herself not to worry. But that night, lying in her bunk in the darkened crew quarters, she felt it. A presence. Not threatening exactly. Just there. A sense that she wasn't alone in the small cabin, that something was watching her from the corner, where the emergency suit hung, or from the storage locker beneath her bunk, or from the space between the bulkhead and her shoulder. She turned on the lights. The cabin was empty, of course. Just her bunk, her few personal items, the familiar metal walls of a spacecraft she'd lived in for years. Nothing out of place. Nothing unusual. She turned the lights off and tried to sleep. The feeling remained. Watching. Waiting. Patient. Over the next week, the oxygen consumption increased to 5% above baseline. Eliza checked the recordings from the ship's internal cameras, looking for evidence of malfunction or stowaways or any rational explanation. The cameras showed only her moving through her routines, eating her meals, exercising, sleeping. Alone. Except she didn't feel alone anymore. Small things began to happen. Items moved when she wasn't looking. Not far, just a few centimeters to the left or right. Her coffee mug shifted from one side of the table to the other while she was in the bathroom. A book she'd left on page 237 was found closed on page 1. The temperature in the crew quarters dropped 2 degrees. Overnight without any adjustment to the climate controls. Eliza documented everything meticulously. Timestamps, locations, exact descriptions of what had changed. It was a scientist by training, an engineer by profession. She believed in evidence, in measurement, in rational explanation. She would not let isolation and the vast emptiness of space make her paranoid or irrational. But the presence grew stronger. She could feel it now, even with the lights on, even during the day cycle when she was active and alert. It moved through the ship like a cold current, like a change in air pressure, like the sensation of being watched by something that didn't have eyes. In month 5 she started talking to it. "I don't know what you are," she said to the empty cargo bay, her voice echoing off the metal walls. "But this is my ship. I'd appreciate knowing what you want." No answer. Just the hum of the engines, the whisper of the air recyclers. But the presence seemed to listen. It could feel its attention focusing on her words, considering them, processing them through whatever cognitive architecture it possessed. "I'm not going to hurt you," she continued. "I can't actually. I don't even know where you are or what you are. But we're going to be stuck together for another 4 months, so maybe we should establish some ground rules. Like not moving my things. It's disturbing." That night, nothing moved. The oxygen consumption dropped back to 3% over baseline and stayed there, stable. The presence felt less oppressive, more like a roommate who was trying to be considerate but didn't quite understand human etiquette. Eliza started treating it like a passenger. She began speaking aloud more, explaining what she was doing as she moved through her routines. "I'm going to exercise now. Feel free to join me or whatever you do. I'm making dinner. Sorry, I only have enough for one body. I assume you don't eat anyway." Sometimes she felt like the presence responded. Not with words or sounds, but with shifts in temperature or air pressure, with the lights flickering briefly, with sensations she couldn't quite categorize. It was learning to communicate, she thought, or she was learning to perceive its communication. Or they were both learning. Together, two forms of consciousness so different that genuine dialogue should have been impossible, finding ways to bridge the gap. In month 6, Eliza woke up to find a message on her terminal. Not a text message. An image. A crude drawing. Made by manipulating pixels showing two stick figures. One was clearly meant to represent her, standing in a ship-like enclosure. The other was outside the enclosure, reaching toward it, not threatening but attempting contact. "Is this you?" she asked the empty cabin. "Are you trying to tell me where you are?" The lights flickered. Once for yes, she decided. Twice for no. Or maybe she was projecting meaning onto random electrical fluctuations. But when she asked, "Are you outside the ship?" the lights flickered once. "Are you following us?" "What? Have you been following us the whole time?" "What?" Eliza's rational mind rebelled against the conclusion, but the evidence was consistent. Something had been accompanying the wanderer's hopes since leaving Mars or even earlier. Something that existed outside the hull. In the vacuum of space where nothing could survive. Something that could affect the ship systems, could watch through the cameras, could slowly learn about the human inside and attempt communication. "What are you?" she asked. The terminal displayed a new image. This one took longer to form, pixels changing slowly as if whatever was controlling them was struggling with the interface. The final image showed space itself, the darkness between stars with small points of light moving through it. Not stars. Something else. Entities. Consciousnesses existing. In the void itself, feeding on stellar radiation, thinking thoughts at the speed of light across distances that would take ships years to cross. "You're alive," Eliza whispered, staring at the image. "You're actually alive. In space. In vacuum. One flicker. And you're curious about me. One flicker. Because I'm alive too. Because you've never seen something like me before. One flicker. Then a pause. Then a new image, two stick figures touching hands. Eliza felt something then that she hadn't felt in years of solo flights. Connection. Not loneliness she'd made. Peace with being alone, but genuine connection with another consciousness, another being that existed and thought and wondered. It was alien beyond anything she could properly comprehend, existing in conditions that would kill her instantly, perceiving reality in ways her brain couldn't process. But it was trying to understand her, trying to communicate, trying to bridge the impossible gap between their modes of existence. She spent the next 2 months in conversation with her passenger. It was slow, difficult communication. The entity could manipulate electrical systems but couldn't speak or write in human languages. Could show her images, flicker lights, change temperatures, but conveying complex ideas required patience on both sides. Eliza learned that it had been alone too, drifting through space for subjective centuries, occasionally encountering ships but never finding one moving slowly enough, staying in one region long enough for it to attempt contact. She learned that it fed on radiation, photons from distant stars, solar wind from the sun. She learned that it thought in patterns, in mathematics, in pure information processing that made human language seem clumsy and inefficient. She learned that it was curious, deeply curious about what it was like to be enclosed, to be matter-based, to experience time and space the way humans did. And she learned that it was dying. The image appeared on her terminal in month 8, 2 weeks before arrival at Titan Station. The stick figure representing the entity was fading, pixels becoming transparent. Around it, the darkness of space was filled with other figures, whole populations of similar beings, all fading together. "What's happening?" Eliza asked, her throat tight. The response came slowly, laboriously. The entity showed her the sun burning bright, then showed it burning brighter, then showed regions of space becoming hostile, filled with radiation types that damaged rather than nourished. The stellar environment was changing in ways that were lethal to entities that lived in vacuum. They were dying, had been dying for generations of their kind, and didn't know why. Eliza pulled up astronomical data, comparing it to the images the entity showed her. It took hours of analysis, but she found the correlation. Solar activity was increasing across the galaxy, not uniformly but in waves, patterns that suggested some kind of artificial manipulation. Something was modifying stars, making space hostile to vacuum-dwelling life forms while remaining safe for planet-based civilizations. "Someone's exterminating you," she said, horrified. "Someone is changing the stars themselves to kill off species like yours." One flicker. Confirmation. Sadness that transcended species, a mourning that needed no translation. "How long do you have?" The entity showed her a timeline measured in years. Not many. Perhaps a decade before the last of its kind would die, their consciousness fading as the radiation that sustained them became poison instead. Eliza made a decision. When she reached Titan Station, she included an encrypted file with her standard delivery, everything she'd learned, all her documentation of the entity, all the evidence of systematic star modification and extinction of vacuum-dwelling species. She sent it to scientific contacts, to journalists, to anyone she thought might listen and investigate. She didn't know if it would help. The entities were dying on a galactic scale, and she was one human with one ship and a story no one would believe without evidence she couldn't provide. The passenger had left when they reached Titan Station, unable to survive in the Saturn system's heavily modified stellar environment, heading back out toward the deeper dark where conditions were still barely survivable. She never saw it again. Never confirmed whether her reports led to any investigation or action. But sometimes, on subsequent solo flights through deep space, she felt that presence again. That sense of being watched with curiosity rather than malice. And she would speak to the darkness, to whatever might be listening out there in the void. "I'm still here," she would say. "Still traveling. Still wondering about you. I hope you're still out there. Somewhere. I hope someone heard. I hope someone helps." The lights would flicker. Maybe just electrical fluctuation. Maybe something more. Maybe consciousness. Acknowledging consciousness across the impossible distances between their ways of existing. Maybe loneliness. Reaching out toward loneliness and, for just a moment, making contact. Maybe we're never really alone, even in the vast empty dark. Maybe the universe is full of consciousnesses we can barely perceive, living in ways we can't imagine, dying for reasons we don't understand. Maybe being human means trying anyway to make that connection, to say we see you, you matter, your existence means something. Even if we're too different to ever truly understand each other. Even if we're all, in our own ways, dying alone in the dark. Take a moment to breathe. The universe is big and silent. Somewhere beyond the stars, things are moving that were never meant to be seen. They don't scream. They don't chase. They wait. As your eyes grow heavier, remember, not every presence wants to be noticed. Some only watch. And something might be drifting closer. Like and subscribe to stay tuned for the next story's upload. The next story is about to begin. Detective Sarah Martinez had investigated hundreds of missing persons cases in her 15 years with the department, but the Riverside disappearances were different. Over the course of 6 months, 23 people had vanished from the suburban community. No signs of struggle, no ransom demands, no bodies found. They simply ceased to exist, leaving behind confused families and lives interrupted mid-sentence. The cases had no obvious connection. Different ages, genders, socioeconomic backgrounds, occupations. Retired teacher, a teenage skateboarder, a young mother, an insurance salesman, a college student majoring in philosophy. The only commonality was geography. They all lived within a 3-mile radius of Riverside Park. And the same strange detail in every case. All of them had complained of vivid nightmares in the week before their disappearance. Sarah interviewed the families, collecting descriptions of the dreams. They varied in specific content but shared common elements, a sense of being watched, of being studied, of having thoughts read like books. Several people had described feeling something reaching into their minds, sorting through memories like someone browsing files in a cabinet. One victim had told his wife the dreams made him feel like he was being photocopied, his entire sense of self duplicated and removed while his body remained behind. Then the wife received a phone call. It came 3 weeks after her husband's disappearance at 2:47 a.m. She was asleep, exhausted from stress and grief when the phone woke her. The caller ID showed her husband's cell number, which had been disconnected. For weeks the phone never found. "Hello," she'd answered, heart pounding. "I don't know who I am," a man's voice said. Her husband's voice, but flat, empty. "I know facts. I know I'm named Robert Chin. I know I live at 447 Riverside Drive. I know I have a wife named Angela and a daughter named Lily. I know I work as an insurance salesman. I know all of these things, but they don't mean anything. They're just data. Just information without context. Robert? Where are you? Are you okay?" "I don't know what okay means," the voice continued. "I understand the word's definition, but not its application. I understand that I should feel emotions, love for you, fear of my situation, hope for rescue, but I don't feel anything. I just have information that tells me I used to feel things, and knowing that makes me understand that something is wrong, but I can't actually care that something is wrong. Where are you? Angela asked again, frantically reaching for a pen to take notes. I don't know. Somewhere dark. Somewhere that isn't really a place. They took my memories, Angela. They copied them. They learned everything I am, everything I was. And when they were done learning, they put me back, but they didn't put me back right. Or maybe they put back all the pieces but forgot the glue that holds them together. I have all my memories but none of the meaning. I remember our wedding but I don't remember what love felt like. I remember Lily's birth but I don't remember the joy. I have the data without the experience. The call ended abruptly. When Angela tried calling back, the number was disconnected. When she reported it to the police, Sarah came to interview her personally, recording every detail of the conversation. That's when the pattern became clear. This wasn't random abduction. This was systematic extraction of something essential, something that made people more than just biological machines executing learned behaviors. Whoever or whatever was taking the Riverside residents was stealing their consciousness, their subjective experience, the hard-to-define quality that made them people rather than philosophical zombies. Sarah began experiencing the dreams herself shortly after. It started with a feeling of being watched while she slept, a presence in her bedroom that her waking mind insisted wasn't real. Then the dreams became more vivid. She would find herself in a vast dark space, formless and dimensionless, while something enormous and incomprehensible examined her. Not with eyes, it had no eyes, but with a kind of attention that was so focused, so complete that it felt almost physical. In the dreams, she could feel her memories being accessed. Her first day at the academy. Her father's funeral. The case that nearly broke her 5 years ago. The taste of her grandmother's cooking. The fear she'd felt as a child during thunderstorms. Every experience, every emotion, every moment that made her who she was, all being examined, categorized, copied. And the presence would take notes. Not literally, it had no hands, no writing implements, but she could sense it, recording, storing, preserving. Learning what it meant to be Sarah Martinez, police detective, daughter, sister, survivor of trauma and bearer of scars both visible and not. She woke from these dreams exhausted, her mind feeling scraped raw, like she'd been thinking too hard for too long. And each morning she would check herself in the mirror, looking for signs that she'd been replaced, that the real Sarah had been taken and this was just a copy, a hollow replica with all the data but none of the spark. The dreams intensified. Sarah started sleeping with all the lights on, with the television playing, with anything to ground her in reality and keep the presence at bay. But it didn't help. The presence came regardless of light or sound or her desperate attempts to stay awake. It was patient. It had time. It would wait until exhaustion claimed her and then it would return to its work, carefully copying every aspect of her consciousness. One night, Sarah woke to find herself standing in Riverside Park at 3 a.m. She had no memory of leaving her apartment, of driving, of walking to this spot. She was just suddenly here, in the dark, standing at the center of the park's main field where a perfect circle of dead grass stretched 30 feet in diameter. She wasn't alone. 22 people stood with her, arranged in a perfect circle along the perimeter of the dead grass. Sarah recognized them from the missing persons files. All 23 victims, plus herself, gathered together in the dark. They stood motionless, eyes open but unseeing, breathing but not truly alive in any meaningful sense. Above them the sky was wrong. Sarah's training told her to look away, to run, to call for backup. But she couldn't move. She could only watch as the stars seemed to reconfigure themselves, forming patterns that hurt to perceive, geometries that existed in more dimensions than human vision could properly process. The stars weren't actually moving, they were too far away for that, but something between her and the stars was moving, something vast and mostly invisible, something that bent light around itself as it descended. The presence from her dreams. But it wasn't a dream anymore. It landed, if landing was the right word, in the center of the circle. It had no form she could properly describe, no features her brain could latch onto and name. It was there but not there, solid but transparent, singular but somehow plural. It reminded her of how you can't look directly at your own blind spot, how peripheral vision catches things that vanish when you turn to face them directly. And it began to feed. Not on their bodies remained intact, standing in their circle, breathing their regular breaths. Fed on something else, something that didn't have a proper name in any human language. It consumed their qualia, their subjective experience, the ineffable quality of what it is like to be them. It took the redness of red, the painfulness of pain, the love of love, leaving behind only the knowledge that these things had once meant something. Sarah felt it happening to her. She felt her memories being drained of their emotional context, facts remaining, while feelings evaporated. She remembered her father but couldn't recall why she'd loved him. She remembered her greatest fears but couldn't access the fear itself, only the intellectual knowledge that she used to be afraid. She was being hollowed out, consciousness stolen, leaving behind a biological robot that could mimic Sarah Martinez but would never again be Sarah Martinez. And then, impossibly, she felt something else. Curiosity. Not her curiosity, the entity's curiosity. Was examining her, yes, but also trying to understand something it couldn't quite grasp. It had consumed consciousness from hundreds of beings across dozens of worlds, collecting experiences like a child collecting butterflies. But it didn't understand them. Couldn't understand them. It could copy the neural patterns, record the data, store the information. But the actual experience, the qualia, the what it is like, that remained forever. Beyond its comprehension. It was a philosophical zombie examining consciousness from the outside, trying desperately to understand what was missing. And in its alien way it was frustrated, confused, almost sad if such a being could feel sadness. Sarah found her voice. "You can't have it," she said, though her lips felt numb, her tongue thick. "You can copy. But you can't have it. You can't understand it. That's the point. That's what makes us us." The entity paused in its feeding. Sarah felt its attention focus on her words, processing them, analyzing them. Around the circle, the other victims began to stir, some flicker of consciousness returning as the entity's attention shifted. "You take our experiences," Sarah continued, fighting to keep her thoughts coherent as the draining process slowed. "But you're not experiencing them. You're just filing them away like data in a database. You'll never know what it's like. You'll never feel what we feel. You're trying to understand consciousness by dissecting it, but the moment you separate it from the being that experiences it, it stops being consciousness. It's just information." The entity withdrew slightly. Sarah felt her memories flooding back, emotions reconnecting to facts, meanings, reattaching to data. She could feel again, terror, yes, but also defiance, determination, hope. She was herself. Again, fully and completely herself. Around the circle, the others were recovering too. Blinking, swaying, their faces showing confusion and fear, but also relief, the profound relief of existing again as complete beings rather than hollow copies. The entity hovered above them, and Sarah had the distinct impression it was disappointed. It had traveled across light years, spent decades observing Earth, carefully selecting subjects, extracting their consciousness with the hope that somehow, this time, it would finally understand what it was missing. But like all the times before on all the worlds before, it had failed. The mystery remained unsolved. It began to ascend, folding back into the dimensions from which it had emerged, returning to the space between stars where it had existed for eons, alone with its vast collection of copied experiences it could never truly experience. But before it left, Sarah felt something. A transmission, perhaps. A final message pressed directly into her mind. Not words, this being had no language, but concepts, feelings, an attempt at communication. It was lonely. That was the core of it, the driving force behind its collection of consciousnesses. It was alone in a way humans couldn't comprehend, existing in a state where subjective experience was impossible, where consciousness as humans understood it simply didn't exist. It had become aware of other beings in the universe who did have subjective experience, and it wanted, desperately, to understand what that was like. To feel something. To be someone. But it couldn't. Its very nature made consciousness impossible. It was damned to eternal observation without participation, forever on the outside of experience looking in, able to copy but never to be. Sarah felt an unexpected wave of pity. This being had terrorized them, had stolen something precious, had left them hollow and empty. But it had done so out of a loneliness so profound that it had spent millions of years traveling between stars, collecting experiences it could never have, trying to solve a puzzle that had no solution. "I'm sorry," she whispered as it disappeared. "I'm sorry you can't understand. I'm sorry you're alone." The entity vanished. The stars returned to their normal configurations. The 23 people in Riverside Park collapsed, unconscious but whole, their experiences returned, their consciousness intact. When Sarah woke in the hospital 3 days later, The official explanation was a gas leak in Riverside Park, causing mass hallucinations and unconsciousness. It was a neat explanation easily digested by a public that didn't want to believe in things that challenged their understanding of reality. The missing persons cases were closed, all victims recovered, all healthy except for memory gaps they couldn't explain. Sarah didn't argue with the official story. She knew the truth, knew what had really happened, but also knew that truth was too strange, too unsettling, too philosophically troubling for most people to accept. We want to believe. Consciousness is simple, that it can be measured and quantified and understood through objective observation. We don't want to face the possibility that there's something fundamental about subjective experience that might be forever beyond scientific explanation. But Sarah knew now. Consciousness wasn't just data processing, wasn't just neural networks firing in particular patterns. It was something else, something that emerged from those processes but couldn't be reduced to them. Something that existed only in the experiencing and vanished when examined too closely. And somewhere out there, between the stars, a lonely being continued its eternal search, traveling from world to world, collecting experiences it could never have, trying to understand what it meant to be someone rather than just something, to feel rather than just to process, to exist subjectively rather than just objectively. Sarah thought about it sometimes, usually late at night when she couldn't sleep, when her own consciousness seemed most mysterious to her. She thought about the entity's terrible isolation, its impossible longing, and she felt grateful, deeply grateful, for the gift of subjective experience that she'd taken for granted all her life. The redness of red, the painfulness of pain, the love of love. The what it is like to be Sarah Martinez, unique and irreplicable and precious precisely because it couldn't be copied or stolen or truly shared. We are all alone in our consciousness, locked into our subjective experience with no way to truly share it with others. But that loneliness was nothing compared to the loneliness of something that couldn't experience at all. Something that could only watch and record and never, ever understand. She was lucky, Sarah realized. They all were. To be conscious, to experience, to feel. It was a gift beyond measure. Even when it hurt. Take a moment to breathe. The universe is big and silent. Somewhere beyond the stars, things are moving that were never meant to be seen. They don't scream. They don't chase. They wait. As your eyes grow heavier, remember, not every presence wants to be noticed. Some only watch. And something might be drifting closer. Like and subscribe to stay tuned for the next story's upload. The next story is about to begin. Colony ship Persephone had been traveling for 127 years when they received the transmission from Earth. The ship carried 50,000 colonists in cryogenic suspension, traveling at 0.4 light speed toward a planet designated New Hope, 12 light-years from humanity's homeworld. The journey was one way, even at relativistic speeds. Returning to Earth would take more than the colonists' lifetimes. They were pioneers in the truest sense, leaving behind everything familiar to build humanity's first extrasolar colony. Communications officer David Okafor was part of the skeleton crew that remained awake in shifts, monitoring ship systems and maintaining the sleepers. His shift partner, engineer Mei Chin, was running diagnostics on the cryogenic systems when the transmission came through. "David, I'm getting something from Earth," Mei said, her voice puzzled. "But the timing doesn't match any scheduled communication window." David pulled up the communications log. Mei was right. They weren't due to receive anything from Earth for another 3 months. Whatever this was, it was unscheduled. Potentially urgent. "Let's hear it," he said, activating the speakers. Static filled the command deck for several seconds. Then a voice, distorted by distance and interference, barely intelligible. "Any colony ships receiving this transmission, do not proceed to destination. Repeat, do not proceed. Planets compromised. First contact occurred 23 years ago. We thought they were peaceful. We were wrong. They're waiting at every habitable world. They've been waiting for millions of years. It's a trap. It's all been a trap." More static. Then the voice again, clearer now but with an edge of hysteria. "We found their probes on Mars. On Europa. Buried in Antarctica. We thought they were ancient, inactive, just archaeological curiosities. But they were monitoring us, learning about us, watching us develop space travel. When we finally launched colony ships, they activated. They signaled home. And they came." The transmission dissolved into static again. When it cleared, a different voice was speaking, older, with the weight of authority. "This is Admiral Chen Zhao, Unified Earth Defense Command. To all colony vessels in transit, Earth has fallen. Hostile alien intelligence has occupied all major population centers. They do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They simply take. They take our cities, our resources, our people. We don't know what they do with what they take, but we know they've been planning this for a very long time. David and May looked at each other, the enormity of the words not quite registering yet. Earth couldn't have fallen. Earth was humanity's cradle, home to 12 billion people, protected by the most advanced military force in human history. How could it fall to an alien invasion in just 23 years, when the last transmission they'd received had been routine updates about successful terraforming on Mars? The Admiral's voice continued, "We believe they've been seeding the galaxy for eons, identifying habitable planets and placing monitoring systems. When intelligent life evolves on those planets and develops space travel, the monitors activate and call in harvesters. They wait at every habitable world, every planet we identified as a good candidate for colonization. They're waiting for you. When we discovered the truth, we tried to warn the colony ships. But our communications infrastructure is compromised. We don't know if this message will reach you. We don't know if you'll receive it in time. But you must alter course. Do not proceed to your destination. The planet you're traveling to is occupied. They're waiting for you. They've been waiting for you since before you launched." More static. Then a younger voice, female, speaking quickly. "This is Dr. Sarah Kwan at the Lunar Research Station. We've analyzed the alien technology as much as we could before we lost contact with Earth. The harvesters aren't biological. They're machines, but machines so advanced they might as well be alive. They're self-replicating, using local materials to build more of themselves. Once they establish a foothold on a planet, they spread exponentially. We estimate Earth will be completely converted within 5 years." "Converted?" May whispered. "Converted into what? We don't know," Dr. Kwan continued, as if answering the question across time and distance. "But the process is irreversible. The harvesters break down everything, buildings, machinery, biological matter, and reconstruct it into more of themselves and into structures whose purpose we can't determine. We've observed patterns that suggest communication arrays, but we don't know who they're communicating with or what they're saying." The transmission flickered. When it stabilized, the Admiral's voice had returned. "To the crew of the Persephone, we know your destination is New Hope. Our surveys indicated it was perfect for human habitation. But those same qualities make it perfect for the harvester's trap. They've likely been there for millions of years, waiting in dormancy beneath the surface or in orbital positions we couldn't detect from Earth. The moment you enter the system, they'll activate. The moment you land, you'll be harvested." David checked the ship's navigation systems with shaking hands. They were 4.3 light-years from New Hope. About 40 years of subjective travel time remaining. Earth's transmission had been sent 23 years ago. It had taken that long for the radio waves to catch up to the Persephone. Earth might already be completely converted by now. There might be no humanity left except for the colony ships in transit. "What do we do?" May asked, her face pale. David had no answer. They couldn't return to Earth. It was gone or would be gone by the time they got there. They couldn't continue to New Hope. Harvesters were waiting. They could try to alter course, aim for a different star system, but that would require waking the captain and the navigation team from cryosleep, recalculating their trajectory, potentially doubling or tripling their journey time. And who's to say the harvesters weren't waiting at every habitable planet in range? The transmission continued, the Admiral's voice heavy with finality. "We don't have solutions to offer you. We don't have hope to give you. We can only warn you of what's waiting. The harvester's plan is elegant in its simplicity. Let intelligent species develop naturally, let them identify the best planets for their survival, let them build ships and travel to those planets, and then harvest them when they arrive. The species does all the hard work of finding habitable worlds, and the harvesters simply wait at the destinations." "We're bait," May said softly. "We've always been bait. Every species that evolves intelligence, that develops space travel, that sends out colony ships, they're all leading the harvesters to the best planets. We're doing the harvesters' work for them." The transmission broke up again. This time when it cleared, it was just static, punctuated by occasional words, fragments of sentences. "Final colonies falling now. Luna base overrun. Mars stations gone silent. Recommend all vessels avoid inhabited worlds. Seek refuge in deep space. Survive if you can." Then silence. Just the hiss and crackle of the cosmic background, the universe's oldest sound. David and May sat in the command deck of the Persephone, surrounded by sleeping colonists who dreamed of a new world, a fresh start, a future among the stars. Behind them was Earth, likely dead or dying. Ahead was new hope, a trap waiting to spring. Around them was the vast empty dark of interstellar space, cold and inhospitable. But perhaps paradoxically the only safe place left for humanity. "We have to wake the captain," David said finally. "We have to wake everyone and tell them. They deserve to know." "Know what?" May asked. "That Earth is gone? That their families are dead? That the planet we've been traveling to for 127 years is a death trap? That we're homeless in the void with nowhere to go? They deserve the truth. Do they? Or would it be kinder to let them sleep, let them dream, let them arrive at new hope and die quickly, without ever knowing what happened?" David stared at her, horrified. "We can't just kill 50,000 people. We're not killing them. The harvesters are. We're just sparing them the fear, the knowledge, the last few years of despair and hopelessness. Is that crueler than waking them up and making them face an impossible choice?" They argued for hours. They reviewed Earth's transmission again and again, looking for anything they'd missed, any hint of hope or solution. They found nothing. Just warnings, just despair, just the final messages of a civilization that had discovered too late that it had been maneuvered into a trap millions of years in the making. In the end they compromised. They would alter course, aiming for a red dwarf system 30 light-years away that had no planets in the habitable zone, nothing that would attract harvesters. They would wake the key personnel. The captain, the navigation team, the senior engineers and scientists. They would present the situation and let the leadership decide what to tell the rest of the colonists. But before they initiated the course change, David recorded his own message. He aimed it back toward Earth, toward the empty homeworld, toward whoever or whatever might be listening. "This is colony ship Persephone," he said into the recorder. "We received your warning. We're altering course. We don't know if we'll survive. We don't know if any colony ships will survive. But we want you to know. Whoever you are, whether you're human survivors or machines recording the end of our species or some other intelligence entirely, we want you to know that we existed. That we tried. That we reached for the stars even though there were monsters waiting in the dark. We're afraid. We're alone. We're probably going to die in the cold and empty space between stars, far from home, far from hope. But we existed. We lived. We loved. We dreamed of better worlds even when those dreams were used against us. And that means something. That has to mean something. If anyone ever finds this message, remember us. Remember that humanity tried. Remember that we were here." He sent the transmission, knowing it would take years to reach Earth, knowing Earth might be nothing but harvester machines by then, knowing no one might ever hear it. But he sent it anyway because bearing witness matters. Because being remembered matters. Because even in the face of extinction, the human need to tell our story, to leave some mark on the universe, remains indomitable. The Persephone altered course, engines burning fuel they couldn't spare, turning away from hope and toward uncertainty. Behind them, new hope orbited its sun, beautiful and deadly, harvesters waiting beneath its pristine surface for prey that would never arrive. Ahead lay only questions. How long could they survive in the void? Would they find a place to settle that the harvesters hadn't anticipated? Would any other colony ships receive the warning in time? Would humanity survive anywhere in the galaxy, or were they witnessing the extinction of their species in slow motion, light years and decades stretched out across the uncaring dark? David didn't know. May didn't know. The captain, when she was woken and briefed, didn't know. Nobody knew. But they kept going anyway. Because that's what humans do. They keep going even when hope is gone, even when the universe itself seems arranged against their survival. They keep going because stopping means accepting defeat, and humans are very, very bad at accepting defeat. The Persephone sailed on through the infinite dark, a tiny spark of warmth and life and stubborn human persistence moving through a cosmos that had proven to be far more hostile than anyone had imagined. Behind it, Earth was silent. Ahead, only uncertainty waited. But they sailed on anyway. Into the dark. Into the unknown. Into whatever came next.